Within every writer, whether it's you, me, or Stephen King, is a creative force driving us to tell our stories. Sometimes though, we can feel like the rules of writing are getting in the way. Sometimes it feels like we can choose to be creative or marketable, not often both. But in this video, I want to show you how even one of the best-selling authors of all time has been breaking rules since day one, really, so maybe you should too. A huge thanks to Mibble Art for sponsoring this video. They're celebrating 9 years of helping indie authors to elevate their books with professional cover design, supporting that creative force. More about that in a little bit. For now, let's start with the first thing writers can learn from Stephen King about doing things a little bit differently. You don't have to stick with writing a story purely in standard first-person or third-person narration. It doesn't have to be that traditional and that formal. This is how most writers approach their stories, absolutely, and the main bulk of your book might still be in that format, but that doesn't mean you can't break out of that pattern now and again to find new angles for your story. There are many more ways to present information and to tell your story that you can add into your work. Stephen King's been doing this for his entire career, but I think it's maybe most notable that he even did it in his very first published book, Carrie, in 1974. As well as that traditional narrative prose, the book's made up of newspaper articles, memoirs, interview transcripts, and other stuff. In fact, the story even opens with an article, so let's take a look at it. News item from the Westover, Maine Weekly Enterprise, August 19th, 1966. Rain of stones reported. It was reliably reported by several persons that a rain of stones fell from a clear blue sky on Carlin Street in the town of Chamberlain on August 17th. The stones fell principally on the home of Mrs. Margaret White, damaging the roof extensively and ruining 2 gutters and a downspout valued at approximately $25. Mrs. White, a widow, lives with her 3-year-old daughter, Carrietta. Mrs. White could not be reached for comment. So, in many ways, putting this right up front goes against a lot of common writing advice. This is the very first thing we read in the story, and we don't even really see the titular character besides a quick mention. So there isn't the same kind of establishment of a narrative voice here as you usually get. No confirmation of the here and now or the present scene. We're not over a character's shoulder directly here or looking through their eyes as we normally might expect. But it's interesting, isn't it? The air of ambiguity catches our attention, and there's a sense that even though we might not understand the significance of this strange event yet, there definitely will be one. In other words, it reels us in and makes us want to find out more. It asks a question that we want to know the answer to, all while not following the rules or the traditional path. It's creative, it's kind of bold, and it works. You can do this too at any point in your story. It doesn't just have to be the opening like this. At any point you can add in inserts or excerpts into your story to show us things that a normal narrative voice might not be able to. And writing this type of thing can expand your skills and just be plain fun. For example, I tend to find that writing an interview between your 2 main characters can really help you dial in their voices for when you're writing their dialogue. And even if this type of thing doesn't fit your current story, don't overlook how useful it can be just to practice writing it. Speaking of useful, if you're an indie author, you're going to want a good cover for your book, obviously, and I'm really happy to tell you more about Mibble Art. They've got a full team of book cover artists over there with loads of experience that spans the genres, and they make what is a really difficult task, giving your book an effective cover, really simple, and they stop you from ending up with something you threw together on Canva the day before you launched your book. Not that any of us have ever done that. The fact that they've been doing what they do now for 9 years shows that they know what they're doing and they're trustworthy, and that's really important to me. Even though it's Mibble Art's birthday, they're the ones apparently handing out gifts because they're giving 15% off most of their services, full details in the description below, with an unlimited use birthday coupon. Yeah. It's not just a one-time thing. And even for the stuff that isn't part of the 15% deal, they're still giving you $9 off that too, which is enough to buy one of those books on your ever-growing TBR list. I know from speaking to them that getting your cover right is as important to them as it is to you. They offer you unlimited revisions and no upfront payments, so you only pay for your cover when you love what they've done with it. Again, that speaks to how long they've been doing what they do. They also have free email courses on book marketing and design aimed to help authors be set up for success, as well as services to help with branding your author website and your newsletter and all of that, frankly, quite complicated and difficult stuff. And if you're looking for an even more affordable option for your book cover, they have a sister company called GetCovers that's focused entirely on that. Me and Mibble Art are on the same page with how much we want to help authors to get their work out there in the best possible shape. And obviously, if you buy anything through this promotion, you're supporting me as well as Mibble Art. So thank you very much. do take a look at their portfolio. You can filter it by genre, check out their horror and fantasy covers in particular, but everything I've mentioned can be found at the link in the description. Okay, back to Stephen King. A character's voice is a fundamental part of your story, we all know that, and even if you're not writing in direct first-person narration, the vast majority of novels still contain dialogue, and even third-person narration often encapsulates and supports the voice of your character. That can be a real driving force behind your story, and it's worth knowing that it can be the entire story. Stephen King tried this approach in his book Dolores Claiborne, making the entire story one long monologue from the eponymous hero Dolores, as she explains herself to police who suspect her of murder. When I say one long monologue, I mean exactly that. No chapter breaks, no line breaks, just continuous text from pretty much start to finish, as Dolores gives her entire account of basically a large part of her life. Here's an example of how strongly Stephen King leaned on her voice to create that push through the story, again, right from page 1. Now, he could have said something like, Dolores Claiborne was suspected of murder. As she sat in the police station with the constable and the typist, she thought about how unfair it all was. Doing that would have broken no rules at all, and while it would have been a little bit boring, it's the traditional way to approach a story perhaps. But here's how the book actually starts. What did you ask, Andy Bissett? Do I understand these rights as you've explained them to me? Gory, what makes some men so numb? No, never mind. Still your jaw and listen to me for a while. I got an idea you're going to be listening to me most of the night, so you might as well get used to it. Excuse my reading, but as you can no doubt tell for yourself, this is so much more character forward. It unapologetically jumps straight into Dolores' mind, and we just have to figure her out as we go. There's no context apart from what she decides to give us, and that's just enough to put together where this all might be going. But obviously, starting a story in a very character forward first person isn't perhaps the biggest rule breaker. Yeah, I get that. The real colouring outside the lines here, I'd say, comes in the fact that there are no chapters, no line breaks, no big structural gaps of any kind. There's barely a moment for the reader to take a breath. Most writing advice out there, including my own most of the time, would perhaps suggest that you take opportunities to split up your text a little bit, to control the pacing and to introduce a clear structure, and most of the time I think that'd definitely help. But in this case, going a different way and disregarding that really enhanced this book because it has such a strong voice. So if you're writing something very heavy on character voice, this might be something to try. It doesn't have to be for the whole book, it can just be a chapter or two if you want, but it might be a fun experiment. It makes me wonder whether Stephen King intended to do this from the start, or if he just sank into Dolores' voice after a while and wanted to stay in it while he had it. Sometimes you do just find things along the way with a book, and sometimes you know from the very beginning what you're going to do. Either way, there's a lot more that can contribute to the feel of a book than just the actual words on the page. For example, let's talk about an opportunity for flair and character that I think often gets overlooked in books but is simple and easy to implement for writers of any experience level. I'm talking about chapter titles. There's nothing wrong with keeping traditional, of course, chapter 1, chapter 2, so on, but you can follow your own path here too. Personally, I like to title my chapters. I've done that in a couple of books, mostly to add in jokes or hints about what's going to happen in the chapter. To me, that extends your story beyond the boundary of just the passages themselves and into the formatting of the book. It gives you extra space to add colour and personality. So how can we use that? Well, any way we want, really. You could number your chapters non-sequentially, maybe, if your story takes place out of order, or you could have it run back to front for something that's really inventive. Or you can come up with something so unique that it only really fits your specific story. Stephen King did exactly that in his book Thinner, in which the main character, Billy, is cursed to slowly lose weight until he becomes emaciated. Typical Stephen King there. Pretty dark. The chapters are numbered in a fairly standard way, chapter 1, chapter 2, but they're also titled with additional numbers, the first being chapter 1, 246. Then in the middle we get to chapter 4, 227, chapter 9, 188, chapter 17, 137, then chapter 20, 118. If you haven't guessed yet, those chapter titles there are Billy's weight readings as he loses weight over time. This is a great example of how you can use those chapter titles to just give information. If Stephen King were to have put something like, Billy weighed himself, he was 137 pounds, multiple times throughout the book, I think it might have started to get a little contrived and maybe predictable, and it would have been hard to find new ways to give that basic information, a little more flair. Adding it into the chapter titles makes it clear, puts it up front for the reader where they need it, and that means there's no reason to awkwardly shoehorn in some reason to mention it within the chapter. There's a lot to be said for making the presentation and layout of your story clear and interesting for readers. That's honestly half the battle with hooking them, I think. Obviously, your book cover is a massively important part of that too, so don't forget to check out Mibble Art at the link below. Thank you so much for your support on that. So, what you're watching next? If you're not sure, here's another of my Stephen King videos. Maybe try that. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, happy writing.